The Jets should 100% be trying to land Mike Tomlin as their next head coach, but there's no chance that they will. Let's try and make sense of it today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Wednesday, January 14th, 2026, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day, and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. A big shout out to you everydayers. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. On today's episode, we have our weekly mailbag. Each Wednesday, we try and do a mailbag with listener questions. Thanks so much to everybody who sent in questions. Today, we'll talk about what the Jets' alternative options are if they don't pick Dante Moore second in the NFL draft. We'll talk about how much job security Aaron Glenn really has. But we will begin by talking about the big news of the day in the NFL on Tuesday. Mike Tomlin, the longtime Pittsburgh Steelers head coach, has left the team. Now, he could be pursuing TV deals, but he's available on the open market for teams needing a head coach. The Jets don't need a head coach right now. So our first question is, John, with Tomlin gone, how can the Jets be taken as a serious organization if John Harbaugh and Mike Tomlin are both available and they show no interest in either? I understand that they gave Aaron Glenn a big contract, but either of these guys could possibly turn around this franchise. I think that the question speaks a lot of truth. I remember last year when the Jets were searching for a new head coach, I was very much of the mindset that they needed a big fish. They needed an established coach who could instantly instill credibility in this team. Unfortunately for the Jets, there really was no coach who fit that profile. The closest of the coaches who were available was Mike Vrabel. And once the Patriots job opened up, there was really no chance the Jets were going to be able to land Vrabel because he had those pre-existing ties with the Patriots organization. And frankly, because the Patriots were a more attractive destination with Drake May and all of their salary cap space going forward. We've had 1 year of Aaron Glenn. Aaron Glenn's had a year to establish himself. I don't see how you can have confidence in Aaron Glenn when you have these two huge coaches on the open market. And one of the frustrating things about Woody Johnson is that he just never seems capable of making a good decision. One thing I want to push back on is the idea that the #1 reason Woody Johnson's a bad owner is that he's meddlesome. Now, that's a problem, but the root cause of his meddlesomeness is that he's incapable of making a good decision. He doesn't know what he's doing. And frankly, for many reasons, that's unacceptable for a guy who's owned the team for a quarter century. It's like in 25 years, and we're now heading into year 26, he's learned nothing about the way the NFL operates. He's learned nothing about the way good teams are built, and he's learned nothing about decision-making. Now, Woody Johnson's lack of knowledge about a football team hurts the Jets when he does get meddlesome. But that lack of knowledge, that's the big issue, because this is a situation where a good owner would step in. This is a situation where you want an owner who has authority and is willing to make the move that needs to be made. Nothing against Aaron Glenn. Guy's a team legend. Guy's one of the greatest corners who ever played, one of the greatest players in Jets history. It pains me to say that the Jets should move on from him, but there's an obvious decision to be made here. And over the last 15 years, one of the most frustrating things and most disheartening things for Jets fans has been how the team just makes obviously bad choices. I mean, we could go down the list. Hiring Adam Gase in 2019, drafting Christian Hackenberg in 2016. The list goes. I mean, we could go on for days talking about all the decisions that were obvious to fans that the Jets had made the wrong choice at the time they did it. We're sitting here, and it's January. Aaron Glenn just went 3-14. And I talk every day about the futility of this team, the no interceptions for a full season, the 5 straight losses by 23 plus points, the lack of a 400-yard receiver, the lack of competitiveness, the lack of professionalism. Could Aaron Glenn turn it around to become a good head coach? Of course. Is there anything we saw this year that would suggest that the odds of that happening are good in the next 2 years? Because it's going to have to happen sooner rather than later, or otherwise Aaron Glenn's going to get fired. It doesn't really help the Jets if Aaron Glenn becomes a good coach on his second or third team down the line, and the Jets just help train him. The Jets need him to be a good head coach soon. And when you have guys who have stature, You have guys whose hiring would bring instant credibility to the franchise. You have guys who would give you a reasonable level of confidence that the Jets would start being taken seriously as a franchise. I don't see how you just sit on your hands when these guys are available. It's tough to Aaron Glenn. In some ways, it's not fair because, he's only been here a year. He inherited a mess, but has he done anything to fix it? I don't think that the answer is yes. Would the Jets be a better team with Aaron Glenn as the head coach than John Harbaugh? I don't see how you make that case. Would the Jets be a better team with Aaron Glenn as head coach than they would be with Mike Tomlin? Again, I don't see how you make that case. The obvious thing to do is to target these coaches. And, one thing people will say is, well, they wouldn't want to come here. And my response to that is, yeah, if Woody Johnson picks up the phone and says, hey, John, you want to come coach the Jets? Hey, Mike, want to coach the Jets? Of course they're going to hang up the phone. They're not going to say yes. The Jets would need to sell themselves to these coaches. These are coaches with stature. These are coaches with choices. These are coaches who understand the value that they bring to the table. The Jets would need to explain to them that things are going to be different with this franchise going forward. That ownership is not going to make the same mistakes that they've made in the past. The ownership's not going to undercut the coach the way the coaches have been undercut in the past. That the ownership's not going to meddle in the front office affairs. Yes, meddling's a problem the way Woody Johnson does it. This is the situation where you want your owner to be active, where you want your owner to make a move. Because if the owner makes the right move here, the owner's not going to have to do anything going forward. You sell yourself. You say that, I'm tired of the losing. You say, name your price. We'll pay the salary you're looking for. You want any resources? You need a better facility? You need a bigger staff? Whatever you need, we'll do it. You want control over football operations? We'll work with you. We'll find the GM you want. That's what this requires. This is what the Jets did in 1997 when Rich Kotite had run the Jets into the ground. And there was a bad era of Jets football. They went out and got Bill Parcells. Leon Hess, the old owner, just had enough. He went out and got the proven Hall of Fame coach. Now, Harbaugh and Tomlin are not of Bill Parcells' stature. They're great coaches. They're huge upgrades. They're the coaches the Jets need right now. Parcells is one of the top 10 coaches of all time. The equivalent of Parcells coming to the Jets in 97 would be like if Andy Reid was tired of coaching the Chiefs right now and said, you know what, I'm going to come coach the Jets. And that scenario would not happen because the reason Parcells came to the Jets in 97 is they could offer him something he didn't have in New England, and that was control over personnel. Parcells, at that point in time, really wanted to be the GM, and he wasn't given say over personnel in New England. He was frustrated. He made the famous groceries quotes. You can go back and look that up. And the Jets were willing to make him the head coach and the GM. Andy Reid is obviously the GM in Kansas City right now. It's not the GM, but he has personnel control. It's really his show that he's calling the shots. So, you're not going to get an Andy Reid. This is as good as it's going to get. And it's pretty good. Two excellent coaches, two elite coaches are available right now. And I mean, I think you'd have to say even guys like Kevin Stefanski, even if you want to go as far as Mike McCarthy, I think these are guys who are proven head coaches in this league who would be better than what Aaron Glenn can provide. But for the Jets to just sit around and say, you know what, we don't need Tomlin, we don't need Harbaugh, we're good with Aaron Glenn, I don't see how that makes sense. If you can explain to me how you'd rather have Aaron Glenn as your head coach than Mike Tomlin or John Harbaugh, I really would love to hear that explanation because it's very, very difficult to understand. These are the types of guys. And you have to remember, there's no salary cap for coaches. You can pay a coach whatever you want. It doesn't hurt your team. All it does is hurt your pocketbook. And, Woody Johnson has the money to land one of these guys. The question is whether Woody's going to step up to the plate. And I'll say this. I'm not going to say I'm going to give Woody Johnson a fresh start if he were to step up and land John Harbaugh or Mike Tomlin, because Woody's been behind a lot of bad decisions. And even if he got them, I'm not sure I would trust him to keep his word, which is an issue. But it'd be the first sign I've seen genuine growth from Woody Johnson. It'd be the first sign that maybe Woody Johnson actually gets it. That maybe Woody Johnson's actually making a good faith effort to improve this team, that maybe Woody Johnson's trying to change. It would be a really welcome sign, but it doesn't sound like it's going to even be a consideration for the Jets. You can explain that to me. And this sort of decision-making is why the Jets find themselves in the situation they're in. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, Aaron Glenn's coming back for 2026. I mean, unless something drastic changes, that's just a fact of life. But how much longer will he be here? Is he entering 2026 on the hot seat? It's up in the air, and I'll explain why as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Gusto. Let's be real, no one starts a business for the joy of calculating tax withholdings or managing payroll spreadsheets. That's where Gusto comes in to take the stress out of payroll, benefits, and HR so you can focus on running your business and supporting your team. Gusto is the all-in-one remote-friendly payroll and HR platform that makes managing your team simple, transparent, and fast. Whether you're hiring, onboarding, or paying employees, Gusto helps you do it all from one place without the hassle or hidden fees. Unlimited payroll runs for one monthly price, which means no surprise charges at the end of the month. Gusto's automated tools like offer letters, onboarding materials, and direct deposits save you hours each week. And knowing you can reach certified HR experts anytime give you real peace of mind. Try Gusto today at gusto.com/LockedOnNFL and get 3 months free when you run your first payroll. That's right, 3 months of free payroll at gusto.com/LockedOnNFL. One more time, that's gusto.com/LockedOnNFL.
Hey, it's Matt Derry from the Locked On Lions podcast. The people I love depend on me. If I'm gone, the financial responsibilities don't disappear. I didn't want my family figuring things out during the hardest moment of their lives. That's why I knew only one place to go. I chose life insurance through my friends at Ethos. Ethos makes getting life insurance fast and easy, 100% online. You can get a quote in seconds, apply in minutes, and get same-day coverage. There's no medical exam. You just answer a few simple health questions. You can get up to $3 million in coverage. Some policies are as low as $30 a month. I love the folks at Ethos. Protect your family with life insurance from Ethos now by going to ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. In as little as 10 minutes, you can get the free quote and up to $3 million in coverage at ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. That is ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Application times and rates may vary.
Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day, and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, go check out our new Everydayer Club. It includes access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Jets, compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app, along with an invite to the members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server. Go to LockedOnNYJets.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. And today on Locked On Jets, we're doing our weekly mailbag show as we do each Wednesday. Let's continue now. Our next question. John, now that he seems to be keeping Aaron Glenn over Harbaugh, Tomlin, and everyone else, what are the chances Woody Johnson fires Aaron Glenn after 5 games next year? It sure feels like we've been here before. Indeed, it does. This was the setup the Jets had after the 2023 season, where Jim Harbaugh was on the market, and Woody Johnson, in his infinite wisdom, decided to keep Robert Saleh. And he had so much confidence in Robert Saleh that Saleh got fired 5 games of the 2024 season. And instead of going after Harbaugh, we don't know whether he could have landed him or not, but instead of going after Harbaugh, the Jets ended up with 5 games of Robert Saleh and then 12 games of Jeff Ulbrich. And then we moved on to Aaron Glenn. That is the Woody Johnson way. What are the odds Aaron Glenn gets fired after 5 games next season? Now, I think one of the things that's become clear is that Woody Johnson has become far less predictable. In the past, I always used to be able to predict what Woody would do. He always would cave to fan sentiment. When there was overwhelming demand for the fans to do something, that's what he would do. That's not so clear anymore. Now, there are still cases where he does that, where he does things that way, where it feels like Twitter, X is kind of driving whatever the Jets' decision-making is, but he's also just become way more erratic. So by all accounts, it sounds like he's still very comfortable with Aaron Glenn, even though there was a leaked report. Rich Cimini of ESPN on his podcast indicated that Woody Johnson was very angry about the way the Jets finished the season. There was a word that I'm not allowed to use on this podcast, but it means really angry, which was, vintage Woody Johnson, doing nothing to fix a problem, but leaking to the media that you're angry so that the fans hear that you're angry. But I think one thing that's working for Aaron Glenn in his favor, and I'm kind of doing some educated guesswork when I say this, but it strikes me that Aaron Glenn is far better at managing up than a lot of his predecessors were, that he's better at kind of selling his vision to the owner than pretty much any of the immediate Jets past head coaches or general managers were. Because when you're dealing with Woody Johnson, you're dealing with somebody who doesn't really know the game of the NFL. He doesn't really understand football. He doesn't really understand the way the NFL works. And whenever you have somebody in charge of an organization who doesn't understand the industry, it's not just true in sports. I mean, you can go across lots of areas of business. Some company hires a CEO from a different industry. If they don't know what they're doing, they have to lean on the opinions of other people. Now, the smarter people will eventually learn the industry that they're in. Once they're 25 years in, they will know a great deal about the industry they're in. So, if I'm hired to run, the example that's coming to mind is the episode of The Office when they hired Charles Miner for Dunder Mifflin. Dunder Mifflin's a paper company. Charles Miner came from a different industry. Eventually you'll learn the industry that you're in. But Woody Johnson's never learned about the NFL. So that means he's just relying on outside sources. And that's why you see the Jets, I think, jump wildly from one philosophy to another. Is that Woody doesn't really have any core philosophies. He's just listening, he's just agreeing with the last person he spoke with. And there have been lots of reports, and Aaron Glenn said it himself, that he speaks with Woody frequently. So my guess is that Glenn's done a good job in getting in front of everything that happened. My guess is that Glenn's communicating with Woody frequently, that before the season, he said, look, Woody, we don't have a lot of talent here. I inherited a bad situation. You got to brace yourself. We're going to lose a lot of games. It's going to look really ugly. People are going to start calling for my firing, but you got to understand that I have a plan. That's what strikes me Aaron Glenn has done. And if that's the case, then, I would guess that Aaron Glenn has a lot of time. I would guess that Aaron Glenn's going to have a couple of years to turn it around, but you never know with Woody. Maybe Woody starts listening to somebody else. That would not be unprecedented. And then suddenly Aaron Glenn's in a lot of trouble. It's really difficult to figure out what the ownership of this team is going to do. I think as things stand right now, Aaron Glenn's probably going to survive the 2026 season and be the coach in 2027, but things have a way of changing around this team. And one thing I would say is that there's always the possibility, if you have a disaster season, that the coach pays the price. I don't think the Jets were really viewing Adam Gase as a coach on the hot seat entering the 2020 season. That was Gase's second year. In fact, I remember we had Ian Rappaport on this podcast from NFL Network before the season, and I asked him point blank. He said, no, Ian Rappaport said, unless it's like a disaster season, that Gase was going to get a third year. Well, what happened? It was a disaster season. So, another bad season, all bets are off. Another 3-14 after, what will likely be a pretty big offseason of spending in free agency after adding 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, perhaps a new quarterback. That could change things. And the other aspect of this is if they do draft a quarterback, how the quarterback looks could be an issue. Because if the quarterback goes out and struggles, then I think a lot of the attention will turn to the coaching staff, and people will start saying, we better get a coaching staff in here who knows how to develop a quarterback. That's a situation where Aaron Glenn could be in trouble. But it's tough to say. It's tough to say because the ownership is so unpredictable. I think that if you're a Jets fan hoping for Mike Tomlin, the one silver lining you might have is the reports that have come out, at least in the first couple hours of Tomlin stepping away from Pittsburgh, is sounds very likely Tomlin's going to do TV in 2026, that Tomlin's not interested in coaching next year. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're making a coaching change after 2026, there's a good possibility Tomlin's going to be there. Now, would Woody Johnson be able to step up to the plate and do what it took to land Tomlin? Well, we've been here before. In 2009, he wasn't able to land Bill Cowher. Cowher wanted to speak with the Jets, and Woody went on a vacation to Europe. Now, to be fair, Cowher at the time said it was a long shot that he would take the Jets job, but he was interested in hearing Woody out, and Woody just wasn't interested in meeting with Cowher. So would things be different this time? You could hope, but it's very difficult to say right now. Next question, John. Will Glenn and Muji bring in an experienced quarterbacks coach / assistant head coach on the offensive side of the ball to work with the quarterbacks and support Engstrand? If so, do you know any of the candidates who would be a good fit? Do you think they should bring back John Morton? A lot of reports have suggested that that's the most likely scenario for the Jets, that they would go out and get an experienced coach to kind of help guide Engstrand along. I think that Morton would be the guy I have my eye on. And the reason I say that is, even though Morton just got fired from Detroit, Dan Campbell chose Morton over Engstrand to replace Ben Johnson as offensive coordinator a year ago. And one of the things Campbell said at a press conference, he was kind of asked why he chose Morton over Engstrand. He described that Morton had been on the Detroit staff before. He said Morton had been a really good mentor to Engstrand. So it was kind of a case of taking the mentor over the protege. So the two of them have a working relationship before. Morton's very familiar with the scheme the Jets run. So my guess is he'd be the guy. I think he'd be a logical guy. Now, Morton was the Jets offensive coordinator back in 2017. And even though if you look through the stats, they aren't that impressive on offense, I think when you compare it with the talent the Jets had on offense that year, he actually did a really good job. He was fired after 1 year. I don't think it was based on job performance. He was not the most popular guy in the organization at that point. There were lots of reports of tension points that he brought to the table, that, he wasn't a super popular guy, but everybody who was in the organization at that point is now pretty much gone. So I don't think that would be an issue. He would be the guy I'd have my eye on. What do I think about it? Well, I think if you're going to bring someone in, Morton would be a logical choice. I'm a skeptic of this whole idea that we're going to bring in someone to mentor Tanner Engstrand. To me, this seems like kind of going down the path the Jets always go down, which is instead of addressing a problem head on, you try and find a workaround. I'd rather, if the Jets don't think Engstrand's up to the job right now, that they just move on and bring in a new coordinator, especially if you're going to draft a quarterback second overall, because I think Tanner Engstrand got a big free pass this season because of how bad the quarterback play was. And I think it kind of obscured a lot of aspects of Engstrand's job performance that, first of all, didn't make a lot of sense. And second of all, displayed that he doesn't really understand how to put his players in the best position to succeed. I think it's very easy to get a free pass when you have a bad quarterback and say, who would succeed with this quarterback? But the thing is, there were things that had nothing to do with the quarterback that I saw on a weekly basis that didn't make a lot of sense. So if it was me, I'd move on. But if they're going to bring someone in, I guess Morton would be the guy. I guess that's the direction I would go, but I'd rather see them move forward because the Jets may be drafting a quarterback second overall. And you're on the Locked On Jets podcast. We'll talk about the alternatives to that. I've been pretty vocal that I have reservations about picking Dante Moore number 2. So what else could the Jets do at the quarterback position? Their options aren't great, but I think that the lack of great alternatives does not mean that they should necessarily pick more. And I'll explain why as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. New year, new systems. This is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our business and think there has to be a better way. And there is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades you can make. And that's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Q-U-O, the smarter way to run your business communications. Because when your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. Everyone sees the full conversion thread with Quo, which makes replies faster and more personal. It works right from your phone or computer, and you can even keep your existing number. And Quo's smart AI tools automatically log calls, summarize conversations, and highlight next steps so details never slip through the cracks. It's no surprise that Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses from solo operators to growing teams. Make this the year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/lockedonnfl. That's QUO.com/lockedonnfl. Quo. No missed calls, no missed customers. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Home Chef. As the new year gets going, a lot of people are trying to simplify their routines, and dinner's a big one. Between busy workdays, cold winter nights, and packed schedules, having an easy, reliable dinner plan makes a huge difference, and that's where Home Chef comes in. Home Chef takes the stress out of cooking by delivering fresh, pre-portioned ingredients right to your door with easy-to-follow recipes that actually taste great. They're rated #1 by users of other meal kits for quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease, and it's easy to see why. It comes with over 30 weekly options, including family-sized meals and different dietary choices. Recipes are simple but feel elevated, even restaurant quality, with dishes co-created by chefs like Gordon Ramsay. And everything arrives pre-portioned, so there's less prep, less mess, and no wasted food. For a limited time, Home Chef is offering my listeners 50% off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. Just go to homechef.com/lockedon. That's homechef.com/lockedon for 50% off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. On this Wednesday, we're doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question, John, what do you think of this great idea? Trade the Moore pick if they think he's not good and tank in 2026. Bring back Brady Cook and start him in every game. Get a less qualified backup quarterback in case Cook is hurt. Then they can draft a quarterback high and have the team built up and ready to go. Woody loves losing, so he'll be on board. I don't know if Woody loves losing. I just don't think Woody takes the steps necessary to help the team win. I don't think the Jets are going to tank in 2026, and I don't think they should tank. And I'm not a believer in tanking. You want to know why I'm not a believer in tanking is just look at the way the last couple of weeks have played out. The Jets kept losing games, and they got the #2 pick, and people were acting like the franchise is saved. Then Dante Moore goes out and has a bad Peach Bowl, and people think the franchise is ruined. I think that we need to understand that having a quarterback is an essential part of building a winning team. The Jets are going to have to find a good quarterback in the draft going forward if they want to build a competitive team, if they want to build a playoff team, if they want to build a Super Bowl team. The problem I have with the Jets is that they think that that's the only thing that matters. The Jets always think that they're like one big move away from major success. And the irony is like the one big move that they actually need to make is changing the head coach and getting Tomlin or Harbaugh. If they did that, that actually would be the one big move that could turn the franchise around. But that's like the one thing they won't do. That's like the one splashy thing they won't do, which just drives me crazy. But, I don't think what the Jets did is good for the franchise. And I think that you have to get yourself out of the mindset that you need a number 1 or number 2 overall pick in order to find a good quarterback. Because while there are stories like Drake May, and, you could go back through the years, there are lots of good quarterbacks who go 1 or 2 overall. There are lots of great quarterbacks who don't go that high. Josh Allen was the number 3 quarterback chosen in his class. He's playing this weekend. Bo Nix, he was the number 5 quarterback chosen in his class. Now, maybe you don't like Bo Nix, but his team they've built a good enough team around him to be the 1 seed in the AFC. Sam Darnold may have been the number 3 overall pick, but he's on team 5 right now. He failed in his first team. We know that because it was with the Jets. Brock Purdy was Mr. Irrelevant. I think you have to get yourself out of the mindset that the only way to build a winning team is to have the 1st or 2nd overall pick, because it's not. The best, I think it would have been much better for the Jets to have won games near the end of the season. And yeah, the pick is less obvious, but just drafting Dante Moore is not going to change the franchise. Drafting Dante Moore panning out and building up around him, that's the sort of thing that changes the franchise, or a different quarterback. And I think another thing that needs to be explored when we talk about drafting a quarterback is you have to be okay with some degree of uncertainty. Nobody can predict how the future is going to go. So people say, well, if the Jets don't pick more this year, they'll never get a quarterback. And I don't know how you make that statement. Heading into this season, nobody thought Fernando Mendoza was going to be the number 1 pick in the draft. There were some people who liked him, were high on him. You even heard a few people who thought, if he has a good season, maybe he can get himself into the 2nd round, or maybe even late mid-round 1. Nobody thought he was going to be the number 1 pick. Nobody had him winning the Heisman Trophy. Moore, of course, Moore had some good ratings as a recruit, but nobody entering the season had him pegged as the number 2 overall pick. Things change. And I think when you're judging a quarterback like a Dante Moore, you have to ask yourself, is this the right guy for us? If he is, then you take him. If he's not, then you pass on him, even though the future is uncertain. Because the future was uncertain in 2021. The arguments people were using, the arguments people are using now, the Jets have to take a quarterback because the future is uncertain. Those are the same arguments that were made when the Jets drafted Zach Wilson in 2021. If Zach Wilson was the right guy, it would have been worth taking him. But just the fact that the options going forward were uncertain, that was not a good reason to draft Zach Wilson. And the Jets are worse off if they use that reason. So I think that there has to be a little bit more to this whole thing than just trying to get the number 1 or number 2 overall pick, because there's no shortcuts to success in the NFL. There's some things that help you. I mean, sometimes it is better to have the 1st or 2nd pick, but it's not some cheat code that automatically makes you a good team. Next question, John. In a scenario where the Jets trade down for a big haul, would you be opposed to the Jets either trading back up for Ty Simpson or another quarterback? What are your thoughts on Ty Simpson in general? He's already declared, and while he's very raw, he has a lot of intriguing tools. I haven't been the biggest fan when I've watched him, but I've been more focused on Moore. I'm trying to go through the Dante Moore film right now. I don't like the way Simpson ended the season. I think we have a guy like Mendoza where maybe I was a little skeptical on him in October. Now, the more I've seen him play, the better he's gotten. He's consistently, been on the upswing. He's consistently gotten better through the course of the year. Simpson's kind of the opposite. I think Simpson played his best ball early in the season. I think that he does need a lot of work. I think he is very raw. I wouldn't be opposed to it in general. I think what the Jets need to avoid, though, is they need to avoid drafting a guy so high that he's the only option for you going forward. I don't have a problem with drafting a quarterback later on, if it's late round 1, early round 2, as long as you don't feel like you're totally committed to him going forward. I think the best way I can put it is, if there's a guy whose tools you like, who you think could be developed into a good quarterback, you take him. But I want that guy to have as little pressure on him as possible. I want the Jets to feel like they're pressed into throwing him to the lineup before he's ready. I don't want the view to be that he has to be the savior of the franchise. I think it's fine if you take a quarterback who you think maybe this is a guy who can do things for us. Like the Saints did with Tyler Shuck last year. I don't think the Saints viewed Tyler Shuck as whatever they say. I know they're going to say we always thought he was a franchise quarterback. At the point they drafted him, they picked him in round 2. If you really like the guy, I don't think you'd let him fall to round 2. If you liked him that much, I think it's more, these are tools we think we can develop. We think there's some upside here. I think one of those guys is fine. If you get Simpson low enough where you're not feeling pressured that he absolutely has to be your franchise signal caller, I don't have an issue with it. I think that trading down would probably be a good move, though. I think that the Jets need more draft picks. As many picks as they have, I don't know that they have enough given the roster that they have. One of the things I've noted is they especially are lacking that round 3, round 4, round 5 range. Then they have one pick between 44 and the 150s. That's not enough for a team that needs a lot of quality starters. So I don't have a big issue with it. I'm going to get more into Simpson after I finish with Moore. I don't love him right now, but I think if you take him at a point where you feel comfortable sitting him, where there's not the weight of the world on his shoulders, we're not putting the weight of the franchise on his shoulders, that's something I could probably live with. Our next question, John, what would you pay in order to get Harbaugh or Tomlin to New York? Whatever it takes. This is again, there's no salary cap. It's a blank check. So I give them whatever it takes. I think that these are guys who could immediately instill credibility in this franchise. I think that there's no price that should be too big for either of them. I'd be fine letting them pick the GM of their choice. I'd be fine giving them roster control. The situation where, sometimes, people ask, why would Harbaugh or Tomlin come to a situation like the Jets? If you're willing to give them what they want, then you may be able to land them. And nobody's going to give them what they want like a desperate team. There's no team more desperate than the Jets if the owner can smarten up. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.